The panel discussion topic is the legalization wave, global lessons applied to the local industry. Welcome back on stage. Wesley, Dan, Marie, Pierre, thank you so much for being here. We are going to also have some time for Q&A afterwards, should there be any overflow.
No, thanks so much for the introduction. Thanks for everyone else that's come through and seeing us, but I mean, yeah, legalization, lessons from the global industry. It's been a long day, hasn't it? But I think we have a lot from the global industry that we can look at. I think South Africa's in a pretty good position at this point where the industry's new enough that we can still make changes, but there's a lot of people that are ahead of us that have made various different mistakes and successes that we can learn from. I mean, if we look at some of the models, the newest news out there is Thailand's legalization that's actually gone forward. And that's a model that is still possibly on the table for South Africa at the end of the day, is open legalization and let the industry create itself. We've got the US markets and everything else. So
I think we've kind of caught ourselves in that situation at the moment, whether it was intentional or not, in the sense of the government taking so long in order to get to a point of clear legislation, means that the industry is pushing forward. I mean, if we've said this a little bit earlier today as well, if you just look around in terms of how much people are constantly pushing the boundaries in the industry at the moment, no more just because of the lack of regulation, but also the lack of speed at which it's being done at the moment. And I think that is maybe applicable here, where maybe now with the harms will show themselves in just how long we're taking to get to a point of legislation, just like Thailand.
yeah, I think you had a key point there, is that the industry's starting to push back now.
Yeah.
The government can only delay it for so long, this industry's going to come out. I mean, we had some of the other panelists mentioning that, and putting in perspective that all the legislation and the issues they have in a place like California has pushed the black market to be the biggest it's ever been.
Yeah.
Correct.
So, you know, the trends that are going on globally, I'm going to try to summarize a couple. Obviously, the legalization is a big issue. We can talk about Europe. Germany, to me, is really interesting. And the dark horses in Europe, France is getting interesting. The UK with their novel foods legislation is starting to open up. I mean, they're very restrictive, but that's going to affect us locally. We have our own legalization challenges, but places like America have their own challenges. Illegal at a federal level, legal at a state level. But the one thing that's happening in the States is that the legalization is driven by public opinion. So you're getting up to 70+% of the average population now in agreement with it. And I think that's a little bit where we're behind. We need to get public opinion. We need to start driving the changes. We've got to accept the good stuff overseas, but we've got to do something. We've got to do our own thing.
Yeah.
And I think we've got an outside chance to come up with the envy of the world with something uniquely South African. And I think we're getting there. But there's a long way to go. And the legal issue is the most important issue. The biggest fear that I've got for this industry is we're going to sit around and talk about who got this and who got that and why we're doing this and this minority group and that group, and the rest of the world doesn't care.
No, we're going to be sending to places like Germany.
That's it.
This is a global industry, and it's happening on a global basis, and we need to fit in if we want to export. And we need to concentrate on our strengths, which I personally think are start with cultivation, and then we need to overlay beneficiation on top of that.
Yeah, I mean, we've got some international partners that we can get their perspective on it. With Germany opening up, I mean, Kai will be able to give us a great overview of some of the challenges that we need to make, that we have in place in South Africa to actually access that market, as well as Dr. Uman. We would love to get your opinions on those.
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. It's truly a pleasure and an honor to be here. I've been traveling around the world for quite a bit and getting the message out there. My simple message is that we need to change the stigma regarding cannabis. We need to understand that we have an endocannabinoid system, and this is something that's lacking in the medical profession, and that's really a big barrier, because in America, as we've already said, it's still federally illegal. and state by state things are changing. We're also facing a huge opioid epidemic here. And I agree with all of you folks that you need to think about this as locally and globally. And look at what's very special about your country. Thailand and other countries are doing the same thing because they're looking at the particular strains that can grow well in their country. Use every bit of the population, the farmers, the agricultural opportunities, the economic opportunities to do export and import of knowledge that you can use, and also use your own internal knowledge. And there's a huge global solution from this plant, and we really have to look at it for people, produce, the planet, for peace. If plant was decriminalized throughout the world, we still would not have people facing jail sentences and profit. And this is about health and wellness. And you only have one life to live.
No, definitely I think that's a big issue to start touching on, is that there's a lot of change that needs to happen and a lot of rights that need to be, or wrongs that need to be righted from that side of the industry to stop. In a lot of countries have legalization in terms of medical cultivation or facility cultivation, but still recreationally illegal. And to open up that market for different legislations, I think gets really, really complicated. And I think that's a lesson we can learn from the US specifically. We mentioned on top of the legislation is federally illegal, but state-owned level legal, and the chaos that throws the market into.
I think you pointed it out quite well earlier in terms of there is definitely some markets that's developed, especially in the last 5 years worldwide. But there's also a lot of mistakes that's been made, and some economies have admitted to it better than others. But I think that being behind in the race does give you that benefit of learning from those jurisdictions and looking at their economies and seeing what does and doesn't work. I mean, at the end of the day, we saw that just from America, the financial situation surrounding access, if it's over-regulated alone. It was a huge lesson that I think, because I mean, in the US, everybody can tell you everything is meant to be accessible. It's meant to be financial accessibility, where we constantly saying to each other, admitting to each other, South Africa is not in the same boat.
No, but also, I mean, in the US, you got cannabis companies that have to get armored security trucks to move their finances around because they don't have access to the banking because of legislation that prevents that.
Correct.
But it's money that's still being taxed.
Even now, I mean, if we can regulate our industry faster and better, that means that our smaller businesses can get access to legitimate service providers as well.
And we can eventually get, and I know it's something Pierre's passionate about, is to get in smaller, more rural farmers, to get people to work together in cooperatives to actually get product out into places like the US or Germany, to actually work on that level. And how do we make sure we let everyone access it, but also within a framework that is accessible?
Yeah.
There's a lot of opportunities globally because we're still learning. And as you said, California right now has a huge black market. And in Massachusetts, we're trying to have two people drive to deliver cannabis.
Yeah.
I mean, that's regulation.
All right, so I'm going to jump in on an approach. And I know Kai and I have been on a panel at the Cape Town Expo about this, and it was a very interesting debate with Luke.
Yeah.
I don't think we should be regulating a plant. It's insane that we write laws about a plant. Okay. If a plant is a danger to a human, and there are many poisons in the world, we don't corral the plant and write legislation around it. You can go to a nursery, you can buy a poppy. It doesn't mean you're going to take it home and make opium. But we seem to do this with cannabis. So a lot of our legislation and a lot of the discussion we are engaging in is around this concept of how do we regulate a plant. And it's a wrong starting point. We must start again. So there's unraveling the past and then talking about the future. I'm going to concentrate on the future. We shouldn't regulate a plant. if you want to grow at home and you want to smoke it and jump on it or smear it on you or throw it in the compost heap, who cares? You're an adult, you make a decision. If you want to sell it, it's a whole different story. So like liquor, and this was raised in a previous thing, if you want to do craft beer at home and drink it, you can do that. But if you want to sell it, you need a liquor license. So we need to restructure the structure of the industry. I do get the concept of seed to sale, and we can talk about compliance software, but that is a risk mitigation strategy for me about trying to support a quality standard. And it still doesn't mean you've got to regulate the plant. You've got to regulate the production process. And if you want to make high-grade medical, then you've got to be compliant to high-grade medical standards. But we mix this up with the plant's illegal. And I know we got the Drug Act and the Drug Control Act, and it still exists, it's still real. But we need to change that approach. And if we change that approach, I think we can liberate all aspects of the plant, and we can achieve what we all really want to achieve, what the whole world wants to achieve, is free this miracle plant for medicine, for housing, for fuel, for biofuels, for food. It doesn't matter. But don't start with the plant and all parts thereof are illegal, and then you end up in this debate. So I'll throw that out there.
But it's
And
not even...
I know that's going to invoke an interesting response from Kaya, especially out of Europe. But I'll throw it to the other panel members.
Well, I always take it from an agri point of view, and it's got nothing to do with... It's not new. We're not changing anything. If you want to export fruit to Europe, you have standards.
Yeah.
You can grow it, but if you want to participate in that market, you're going to go through more stringent criteria than growing cannabis. You're going to have, as I was mentioning earlier to some of the people, is if you want to send high-grade fruits due to climate change, you have to send your apples through an X-ray machine to make sure there's no internal rotting, so that it meets the consumer standard of it has to be a flawless skin and a quality apple to make it into that market. That's perfectly acceptable if we apply the same thing to cannabis, because guess what? It's an agri product with an agri standard. Don't treat it differently to everything else. There's already bodies that exist. There's already processes that exist to make sure they have quality control standards. They transparency. We do, as within the track and trace system that we do, you make sure that you can actually write down and show every single thing that's been added to a plant. If you can do that, you can show the consumer transparency. This is what you're getting. This is what is in your product. Whether you choose to buy that product or not is completely up to you. And that's what Pierre's saying, is we shouldn't be regulating. It's designated by your consumer. If your consumer says they want to know what is in their product, you have to therefore comply as a producer. But it's consumer-driven, not government-driven.
So I think you pointed out something very important. If we can regulate it as you suggest, your end product will determine essentially which regulations, industry and process needs to be regulated. If you look at the approach that so many overseas have taken with over-regulation, regulation has various purposes, but one of the main purposes is to prevent harm. Yeah. But you cannot be in a position where what you are using is causing more harm than it's trying to prevent.
I think that's a couple times that's come up this weekend, and it's going to come up again.
Correct.
Would you explain a bit more, in terms of some of the legislation, where that's from?
Sure. So, at the end of the day, if you have a look at, for example, medical products, it's a good way to start. Medical products is regulated, and for a very good reason. If you as a doctor need to prescribe your patient a certain type of product, it needs to be tested, it needs to be controlled, and it needs to be the same every single time. Just in the context, if you, like, pain relief is one thing, but if you're prescribing this, for example, for Alzheimer's, for arthritis, these sorts of things, you need to, with confidence, be able to tell your 88-year-old grandmother that it will affect you the same way every time. There's reasons why medicines are called that. There's reasons standards are met. And then for that reason, it prevents harm. It prevents people being able to market a product to you to cure an illness or a disease, and then you believing that, acting on that belief, and there could actually be more harm done to you at the end of the day. But when regulation starts becoming to the point where it is actually causing more harm, is, for example, as we've pointed out in the draft cannabis bill, where they want to prescribe the number of plants that you can have recreationally in your garden. But that goes directly against the right of privacy, and because your home will be invaded so that your plants can be counted in order to ensure that you remain compliant with the law. Isn't it so ironic?
For something that's not even finished yet.
That's it, for a plant, as you've just pointed out. And it is, as a consenting adult, I can brew beer, but I cannot grow a plant without the police officer coming to my door, knocking, saying, I would like to check that your cannabis is locked away, yet we don't have the same legislation applicable to wine or cigarettes. There's no legislation saying you have to lock it physically away from children, yet they are suggesting this in the context of South African law.
Yeah.
That's not going to prevent harm in the sense of it's going to cause more harm, because you're going to put a parent, by the way, that I think if I recall correctly, the penalty for that would be 5 years. So we want to prescribe a 5-year prison sentence to a parent for not locking their cannabis away, but they can put their milk and their kids' Powerade right next to their bottle of wine. What harm are we truly preventing here?
Yeah.
So that is the purpose of law, and it's meant to assist us and keep us safe, but to what extent and what is the cause and the effect of that in the long run as well. And I think that is what I'm also speaking about when I refer to the mistakes of other jurisdictions, is they also had to learn this terribly. I mean, if you look at the US, the harm that was done to patients being allowed in certain states but not at a federal level meant that if they crossed the border with their CBD oil
between two legal states
with their oil in their pocket, you can get a prison sentence. How is that preventing harm if a doctor in one state has determined this patient is entitled to that medicine?
One of the newest ones is there was an article that came out about the Border Patrol, being federal police officers in New Mexico with their new legalization, is that technically federal officers that are Border Patrol or federal officers have jurisdiction within 100 miles of the border. So 160 kilometers inland from the border,
Wow. Yeah.
you can be let go by a state police officer, but a federal officer that is for Border Patrol security, if he smells weed on you while doing a check for your permits, can arrest you for cannabis, and it is fully within his right, because he's a state officer. And to him it's illegal, but the officer next to him, it is still legal.
So there are a couple
You
of-
bring up several points here. Because our patients can't carry their medicine from border to border.
Yeah.
They can carry their Xanax, they can carry their opioids or anything else anywhere else. And you bring about parents, they're struggling already. And parents have lost their jobs because of these issues here. They've lost their children. They've lost access to care. And why should your zip code dictate your care for your medical treatment?
Yeah.
And you still can't carry this internationally.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. If we go back to why it was banned in the first place, we start understanding how crazy it is. The scary part is we're still trying to unravel it. So I'll give you two other examples. The irony on the other side. A South African company exporting blueberries to the UK, their shipment was impounded by the UK police because the cultivar that they used was suspected of being an Australian
Australia.
cultivar.
Well, didn't it overlap their
In this room,
permits?
there's a TV series, and no negative implications there, of people coming to Africa to steal the genetics, to take it back to Europe, to patent it, and then charge us if we want to grow the same genetics. And where's our law? It's not protecting, so it's selective IP. So this law is messed up, and I think we need to understand where it comes from, and we need to understand that Africa's got certain things, and my view, and I know this is controversial, to hell with a single convention on drugs. That was a US conspiracy, and yes, it was voted by South Africa, but it's irrelevant. Ignore it. And that we should say we need to do what's good for our country. We need to protect our IP. Most of you can get into reparations. The racism, the people that have been locked at, the fact that cannabis, sativa, you can debate came on the ships, but the psychoactive portion of cannabis in the UK came in with the slaves. They came from Africa, and there's no recognition of that. The concept of smoking comes out of Africa. There's no recognition of that. So when it suits people, they tell Africans what they cannot do because it suits them. It's time Africa stood up and said, when it suits us, we must do what's good for our people and our continent. And our government needs to become brave and say, listen, you international guys, we get it. And we're playing in the international game and we get what you want to do. But we're doing it differently. And this is why we're doing it differently.
Well, I mean, you bring a really good point to saying this comes from Africa, and I'll take it one step closer down to exactly where we are. We're in Durban today. It's the home of poison. We have a strain that has been one of the biggest strains in the US in the recreational space for the last few years that we aren't exporting out of a named area, Durban. That's exactly what Pierre's saying on those genetics and cultivars.
I know, but then we passed a law. We passed our law that says our people growing our genetics
that are now famous
can
over there.
Only grow with seeds that are approved. And by the way, none are approved, so you have to import them. And you go...
You're going to grow Durban poison from the US with a phytosanitary certificate.
Yeah. You can't get it from Durban because it's not approved by a South African authority. So you must go to Amsterdam and pay somebody else for the genetics that came from you and then bring it back here and plant it.
I know there's been a lot of legal work that's been done on the agri-space to protect brands, to protect rooibos, to protect Karoo lamb. Are we going to start seeing those changes to protect Durban poison out of a regional specific area?
Yeah.
How do they start structuring that to make sure that we can actually protect what we have and how we go forward with it?
I think it just starts with stepping away from the punitive system. Stop using the punitive system to try and create an industry. I mean, if you look at how they've even approached this after 2018 in the Constitutional Court judgment, it was a punitive response to say you cannot, and if you wish to, it's only to this extent and to this limit, and it is in relation to every single phase of this plant's life. It's absolutely ridiculous, actually.
It is, and it misses the boat, because now we have to go redo what other people in other industries have done, and we have to go redo it for cannabis because we weren't allowed to participate.
Correct.
It's exclusionary law.
So it can't come from a punitive system. It needs to come from, for example, industry. It needs to be industry readers, like you said, like the rooibos tea situation. Farmers in South Africa, wellness groups recognized this and said, no, this needs to be recognized for what it is, and it needs to stay local. And it needs to be then taken up with their specific industries to say, how can you make this possible? I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, we are speaking about a crop, and like Pierre's pointed out, there's so many knowledgeable farmers out there that's already so familiar with what the processes are in order to get to a safe, consumable product. And if it's not the case, there's also so many avenues of what we can do with this product, provided that the industries are developed for it. And that cannot happen in a punitive system. It needs to happen in an open market, supported by regulation and legislation, not limited by it.
Yeah.
I'll give you another example.
I want to walk
Okay, let Dr. Uma after you.
with people 3 facts. Okay. Number 1, I'm originally from India, and this is Ayurvedic medicine. And what that means is Ayu means life, and Veda means knowledge. Cannabis is one of the oldest agricultural plants, and it's a weed. 3 facts. Fact number 1. The United States of America owns the patent. Patent number 663507, which states cannabinoids as an antioxidant and neuroprotection, which means that the government has known all the medical uses for prevention, maintenance, and treatment for Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and dementia. Fact number 2, it was prescribed by doctors and the United States Pharmacopoeia from 1850 to 1942, and it was used for the indications of alcoholism and addiction and the treatment of mental health issues. The third fact is nobody in the whole world has ever died from a cannabis overdose because of this system known as the endocannabinoid system. So these are the three facts that I really want everybody in the world to know. And everybody is a consumer and a customer. So please get educated.
Okay, I just want to give another example. Let's talk about Africa. We Africans. So the US and the United Nations passed this law. So we decide now, I'll give you an example, Zimbabwe and Lesotho, by the way, who've been hailed as the pioneers, and they are. So their logic goes like this. The plant is illegal. If we catch you, we lock you up. And they lock everybody up. So if you're a citizen and you're caught with cannabis, you go to jail. But if you got enough money to pay the government, they give you a license. And then you can trade. So it's legal to trade in cannabis, but only if you're in cahoots with government and you give them money. Okay? Zimbabwe took it one step further. They said, you actually have to have a government department as a shareholder in your business. I know. I stood in the prisons department with the general of prisons, and he was going to be our partner. And so now, if you're part of the government, you can make money. If you pay the government, you can make money. But if you're a citizen, you get arrested. And if you're sick and you need medicine, you don't get access to it. So we got to stop shooting ourselves in the foot and start saying, what is this plant about? It's about a lot of things. It's a wonderful thing. Let the plant be. It's the most powerful plant on the planet. It can save the planet. And then, okay, it's got a little bit of a risk in this area. Regulate it. Or it's going to be used in foods. Regulate it. Why? For public safety. That's the only logical reason to go through standards. It's got to do with public safety, and you can get into efficacy and medicines and that kind of stuff. But we keep choosing and shoot ourselves in the foot with our own citizens. And then we let foreign companies come into our country using those laws that favor them and prejudice local people and make money, and then take the money out of the country. Are we crazy? Why would we do this kind of stuff? It makes no sense.
It's a cash grab. It's a cash grab described as an industry, but what industry are they developing? It's, if we industry people, this show's about industry. At the end of the day, we don't want a few people exporting, we want an actual sustainable industry. What happens to Zimbabwe if the international market closes its doors one day? They have no way to move that product. There's no local industry to support any of those farms, any of those producers. We want to build an industry at the end of the day. We don't just actually want to dress it up and call it what it is, which is a cash grab for a lot of these countries that have gone through.
Are you guys ready to go into some Q&A? Should the audience have any questions? Does anybody in the audience have any questions for our speakers? Okay, otherwise we do have a few minutes still if you guys want to make any closing statements, or Dr. Uma has anything to say as well towards closing.
Yeah, I'll come up with another one. This is a classic for me. We wake up one day and we go, cannabis, we're going to write laws based on your chemical content. So if you got less than 1% or less than 0.2%, which is the current legislation, we're going to call you hemp, and there's a whole lot of rules for that. But if you got THC, then we're going to call you marijuana, and there are a whole lot of rules for that. But nobody told the cannabis plant this. They forgot to communicate this to the plant. The plant doesn't care, okay? And then we've developed this whole legal thing. And then somebody says, okay, why was it 0.2%? And the scientist who did the study said it was completely arbitrary. I didn't know. I just chose a number. It was never meant to be a science-based observation. And in fact, I think it's ridiculously low. So certain countries in the world raise their hemp level to 1%. What does South Africa do? With a climate where we know the THC levels are going up, we've got genetics, the best in the world, which are THC based. They're full spectrum genetics. What do we do? What do we put in our legislation? of all these options, no limit, 1% or 0.3% in America, we decide it's 0.2% and we legislate that. What? Why? And we say to them, okay, why? Show me a scientific report for 1%, 0.3% or 0.2%. There's nothing. There's no evidence base. And this can kill an entire industry. It's not a sort of little regulatory hurdle that you've got to get over. It means that your crop can be destroyed. Not half of it, all of it. A cop can come in there, test it, it's below 0.2%, they can burn the whole lot.
Well, they had a few in the US like that, where hemp growers had a weather storm blow through a patch of abnormal weather, spiked up their THC content, and these guys are getting arrested, making the news for mass cannabis cultivation. And they're like, well, we can't do anything about it. Here's our hemp permit, here's the seed we planted, here's the designated area.
Yeah.
We cannot control certain aspects. Even there, it still happens.
It just speaks to the need for people to be knowledgeable in terms of what they are trying to regulate as well. You need to understand it in order for you to write the regulations to relate it to it. But if it's clouded with, I mean, like we've said to each other, I mean, who is the true experts here? Get them in the room and have the conversations with the lawmakers in order to do this. I mean, we are very lucky in the sense of in our jurisdiction, we do have some public participation that needs to happen. So in terms of the draft bill, we could ask this question: where does these percentages come from? Which research, what papers, what doctors, and when they couldn't answer us, we said to them immediately, understand that we will challenge this constitutionally if you cannot provide a logical reason for your percentages, your plant counts, etc., because that is what good law is. It needs to be underlined with logic at the very, very least.
But the thing is that we can argue that logic both ways now, the way forward, and I'll take you back to base agri. In the milk industry, we look at cattle. Treat cannabis the same way you treat cows. Well, if we need a bit more milk, we have certain genetics we can breed in for milk production. If we need hardiness, we have genetics we can breed in for hardiness. If you want a larger frame, a bit more meat, you can have that. Depending on your climate or your use that you need for your animals, you can now take from across the entire genetic range and breed a functional animal, which is profitable for the area or what you're trying to do. So, do we need a little bit of hemp? Do we need a little bit of THC? Oh, we can produce biomass and fiber while producing higher amounts of cannabinoids for extractions. That's smart farming. That's farming cannabinoids and fiber at the same time. Those are the things that
I agree with
peers.
both of you very clearly. Number one, this is a plant.
Yeah.
Doctors have to understand that we're not going to get the same medicine every time. And cannabis use is personal. I call it a U curve. People have to understand there's a sweet spot for every, no one specific. Too much is just as bad as too little. And the same way these cutoff levels is ridiculous. When they're destroying crop because of a cutoff level, that's drug abuse. The plant could be reused for other things. I'm very proud of seeing what's happening in Thailand. They have different cutoff levels for different levels. And they're using it appropriately. So it has to come through education and here. I said, this 0.3, 0.2% is bullcrap and it needs to change very soon. And people understand that the legislators are looking for guidance, but please learn from other countries. And this plant cannot kill you, so it's very safe. And it's a much safer alternative than what we're giving our patients today. Think about the toothpaste, the soap, and the deodorants that we're using on our body every day. And how much is that regulated?
Thank you. We're going to wrap it up now. Is there any closing statements that anybody would like to make? Or
I'll just say once again, I'm getting a bit boring. The cannabis plant is just a plant, but it's a very powerful plant. And what we don't know is we're all in service of this plant, and that's why we're here. Think about that one. We're working for the plant, not the other way around. The plant doesn't care about all of this. It's got its power, and it's got its goodness, and it's changing. and there are huge economic opportunities, and these unraveling of the past is just a necessary evil. It's a big irritation. It drives all of us nuts. But the end goal is this plant is going to assume its place, is going to save the world, and it's going to bring economic and social prosperity to Africa, and it's about time it does.
Thank you.
Closing remarks?
Sure. I think as the attorney, I would like to make my closing remark just to be that in South Africa we do have a certain extent of public participation in legislation. And if you would like to be a part of this industry, if you would like to form a part of what this means in the future, then I really encourage you to take this up personally and participate. It's not just for attorneys, it's not just for associations and groups. If you have an interest to protect and an interest to speak to, you are constitutionally entitled to make that argument. So please take it up. That is not just a draft bill, that is for regulations. Write to the industry leaders, write to the departments in which they would be regulated. Push this forward. Government is slow. We have seen this in our hands. We try our best in front of Parliament, but it needs to be a unified voice. Needs to be more pressure from everybody in order to have better regulation and legislation. It needs our participation with everybody's knowledge and where people come from a knowledgeable place. Government doesn't necessarily understand absolutely everything about this, but you do if you've been working with it. Raise your voice, share your knowledge, participate in order so that this can become better, so that we can learn from lessons from other jurisdictions and become a pioneer. Let jurisdictions look at us and say we should rather be following a model like South Africa for the cannabis industry.
No, that's great. I think it is time for the industry to push back and push hard enough to make this out there. Share the knowledge. I think we at the point in time where we can answer anyone's questions they have or worries that they have. We have the technology available. We have the software tech to do full track and trace. If you want us to be compliant and be transparent, we can do it. We're at a very good stage in the industry development where we have the tools necessary to make this work if they allow us to actually participate in it. Because if someone is worried about aspect A, we can address it. If they're worried about aspect D, we can address it. We're at that point where we have everything available to us. So I think it's a good time now, and what we use and what we make of it going forward is going to determine a lot.
Thank you, guys. Thank you all so much for your time and for your knowledge. We're going to
Thank you.
close up today, our last panel. We just want to remind our VIP delegates, they are invited to join us for drinks from 6 p.m. this evening in the Cannabis Food Market after closing. And we'll see you guys again tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody. Good night.
Thanks, Dr. Irma.
Thank you.